So Ford is one of the oldest car manufacturers around, and as a result there are so many interesting upgrades and modifications that you can do to your Ford. There's a wealth of motorsport experience. There's lots of specialists cropping up that offer performance parts for your Ford, and they've made some stunning engines over the years. So we're just going to look at Ford tuning, the development of Ford over the years, and give you some ideas on things you can do to your Ford to improve its performance. So you've got yourself a Ford and you want more power from it. So if you've got a turbo engine, you're probably going to take a different route to if you had a naturally aspirated engine. So let's look at first of all the naturally aspirated engines. We've got the Zetecs, the Duratecs, there's some big block engines, there's the Ford Coyote, and some stunning large capacity V8 engines. So a lot of these are just crying out for a little bit more power. So on the smaller, more modern engines that you would typically find in your Fiesta, we see a lot of drivers going for individual throttle bodies. They allow more control over the air going into the cylinders. It would be a mistake to think that at each point in the intake the engine is getting the same amount of air. Just the nature of the piping and the way air travels, some cylinders are going to be more efficiently supplied with air than other cylinders. So having individual throttle bodies, it allows you to sort that out. You can balance the airflow into the engine much more precisely. They generally flow a lot better than just having one throttle body further up the intake. They give you a lot more control over which point in the rev range your power is going to be. So by altering the trumpet size and the intake length on the throttle body gives you a lot more control over that power point. Please stay tuned to our channel. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. Drop us a like because that really helps us to get out there. So do induction kits add power? Well, technically I have to say they do. Looking at all the dyno results, most cars will make a little bit more power, but to be honest you are not going to notice it. You're wasting your money if you expect a power gain on a stock engine with just an induction kit added. But if you've tuned your engine and you're making a lot more power than you would have done originally, then it makes sense to upgrade the induction kit. But choose carefully. Look at the volume of your standard airbox and just make sure you're not fitting a cone filter that's much smaller. If you've decreased the surface area of the filter, you've decreased the airflow. And sad to say, a lot of the cheap aftermarket air filters and induction kits that are sold actually flow pretty badly. They're just literally trying to take money off you for the concept of having a power increase and are offering a power decrease. So the larger capacity V6s, V8 engines, generally if you want significant amounts of power out of those, you need to look at forced induction. So superchargers are generally quite well suited to those big engines. They don't rev very highly, so a turbo wouldn't really work too well. You can certainly get a turbo to work on those big V8s and V6 engines, but most people go for a supercharger because it's directly connected to the crank, and the rotation of the supercharger is directly proportional to the RPM range of the engine, allowing you a lot more control over the way that power is delivered. There's some decent supercharger kits out there for most of the engines. Please subscribe to the channel because we're going to be featuring specific engines and specific upgrades for your Ford. So this video is very much an overview of Ford and all things that you can do to the engines. One tuning house that's worth talking about with regards to Ford is Cosworth. They will typically take a standard Ford engine and rework it. They put their magic on it. So the Cosworth Sierra was a significant upgrade from the Ford Sierras that Ford were putting out. They used a very similar 2-litre engine, but the Cosworth version was capable of running significantly more power. So when they wanted to enter the cars in motorsports, they had to produce a car that was sold as a road car, and they had to produce so many units of the car in order to qualify. So what they did, they over-engineered this road engine so they could use it on the rally cars and on the race cars, and it very easily was adapted with larger turbos, an extra bank of injectors, bigger fuel injectors, and you could double or triple the power in some cases. So looking at what these specialist tuning houses like Cobra and Boss have done to the standard Ford engines gives you a lot of inspiration into things that you can do to your Ford engine as well. So if you've got a more modern Ford engine that is a turbocharged version, remapping is certainly the way to go, and that will generally give you another 20 to 30%. If you've got a diesel version, you'll often get better fuel economy. So there's lots of different ways of remapping. We've seen little plug-in devices that allow you to flash a map to the ECU directly through the OBD2 port. You can't beat taking your car to a specialist though and having it set up on a rolling road. So some of the early ECUs need to be benched flashed. They can't always be done through the OBD2 port. So again, check on our site. We've got specific guides for each of the models of Ford and covered most of the engines. So if you want a little bit more detail, please drop by. Please let us know in the comments what engine you've got, what car you've got, and we'll tailor future video content to suit you so that we're covering the topics that you particularly want us to cover. So on those turbo engines, the next thing you should do after a remap is uprate the turbo. So fitting a larger turbo, it's really taking you to the next step. You will have to remap it again, so it's probably best to leave the remap till last. But if you think about the fuel supply of the engine and getting a larger turbo, you can certainly make some significant power gains on your Ford. So one of the most common things that people do on the smaller Fords, those with the smaller engines, is just improve the handling, and it makes a lot of sense. A lot of these, say the Fiestas, KAs or KAs, depending on where you are and what you want to call them, they're very light cars. They respond very well to small increases in power, but they're much more fun if you've got the handling sorted. So fitting a set of coilovers, uprating the brakes, they can all make a significant difference to the way that your Ford handles and allow you to get that little bit more performance out of it. On the turbo models as well, most of them come with inadequate intercoolers. They're okay for everyday driving, but if you're in the upper end of the RPM range a lot of the time, or you do a lot of spirited driving, and let's face it, most of you will be doing spirited driving looking at this channel, you will find that that intercooler gets rather warm. It suffers from heat soak and becomes less effective at taking that intake charge temperature down. So if you're experiencing that, it makes sense to get a bigger intercooler, to do perhaps a front mounted intercooler, so it's got access to the air coming into the engine bay and it can avoid that problem of heat soak, allowing you to experience the maximum amount of power for the longest duration possible. Camshafts are another popular mod across the Ford range, and there's a lot of companies out there. I think particularly of Burton in the UK, Piper and Kent's, they all do a brilliant set of fast road cams for most Ford engines, and the camshaft will change the duration of the intake and the exhaust timing on the engine's valves, and it really does make significant power gains in terms of a mechanical mod that you can bolt on. So whether you've got the turbo or the naturally aspirated engine, you can expect about 10% more power with the right fast road cam, but don't go too aggressive. If you fit a very aggressive cam profile, you'll have a very lumpy tick over and you'll make your Ford quite hard to drive in everyday traffic. Again, think about the alloy wheel size. In most cases on most Fords, larger alloy wheels just add unsprung weight and they do nothing to improve the handling in wet conditions and on everyday roads. So if you're on a dry track, it might make a difference, and it pays to go with a low profile tyre and a fairly large alloy wheel. But in everyday driving, I really would recommend that people avoid those large heavy alloy wheels. Ford kind of knew what they were doing when they specified the car. The wheels they supply are generally not fantastic looking. There's a few models out there with really good looking wheels, but try and stick to the original OEM specs in terms of tyres and dimensions of the wheel. Let's think now about the braking of the car. So generally a larger brake disc will be better at dissipating the heat. So you may need to address the brake servo and the amount of capacity the brake system has within the reservoir to cope with larger discs, because you'll also need to make that to larger pads, and the pistons will generally be different. You might even go to a 2 or 3 pot piston setup. Think too about brake pads. Don't go too aggressive with those brake pads either. You don't want race spec pads that need to be warm before they actually bite. But pay attention to the handling of the car by uprating the suspension, getting a decent set of coilovers. Dropping the ride height very, very slightly can make a big difference. And also the bushings on the car get very worn over time, and that affects the geometry of the suspension and the rigidity of it. So replacing the bushings with modern rubber bushings can make a big difference, or going to polyurethane bushings can really help tighten everything up. So I really hope this very quick video guide of Ford tuning has been useful to you. Please stay tuned to our channel. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. Drop us a like, because that really helps us to get out there. And thanks so much for watching. We've got other videos coming up on your Fords. If you let us know what model you've got and what engine you've got, I'll try and tailor the future video content to suit you and be of interest to you. Thanks for watching.